A group of friends and I, all from college, were having a summer weekend meetup to party and hang out. I was in charge of organizing the stay, and I chose an Airbnb cabin far out in the forest near our old campus. The location was perfect. We wouldn't have to worry about noise, and we could do whatever we wanted without disturbing anyone. I rented it for the weekend, but I also booked the 2 days prior to spend some time there alone. I wanted to make it a whole vacation week for myself. When I arrived, I was stunned by the view. The cabin was situated in the middle of a vast, grassy plain, with a massive forest stretching out behind it. The scenery was breathtaking. I stepped inside and walked around, taking it all in. The cabin was spacious, much bigger than I had expected, and being so far out in the wilderness, it felt like total freedom. After I set up my stuff in one of the bedrooms, I changed into some hiking clothes and decided to explore the surrounding forest. There were a few trails winding around the tree line, faint and clearly not maintained for the public. I chose one at random and began my walk. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, and the grass between them thinned out. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing were several small tents and huts. They looked old, dirty, and weathered, clearly abandoned. I approached cautiously, inspecting the area. There were piles of random items, things I couldn't quite identify. I didn't know what to make of it. The place seemed like it could have been a campsite at one time, but why was everything left behind? The thought made me uneasy. After a couple of minutes, I decided to leave and head back to the cabin before the unease grew stronger. As I walked back, my mind was consumed with thoughts of the strange campsite. But then, as I reached the tree line and got a glimpse of the cabin in the field, something stopped me dead in my tracks. A person was standing outside, staring at the cabin. I froze, not wanting to make my presence known. I hid behind a tree and watched them carefully. They walked around the cabin, moving cautiously, as if trying not to be noticed. After a minute, they turned and began walking toward the forest. I stayed hidden, breathing quietly as I watched them approach. The person came within a few feet of where I stood, and I could hear their footsteps crunching through the snow. My heart raced as they passed by, unaware of my presence. They continued walking down the same trail I had just come from. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I ran back to the cabin, locked every door and window, and made sure the place was secure. I spent the rest of the day peeking through the windows, trying to figure out who the person was and why they had been lurking around the cabin. When the sun finally set, it had been several hours since I saw the stranger. I began to feel a little more at ease. Maybe they were just a hiker, someone passing through the area. Their behavior had been strange, but there was no clear sign they were intending harm. I convinced myself to relax. After a while, I went to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. I kept waking up every 30 minutes, disturbed by a strange sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Then, in the dead of night, I was abruptly woken by the sound of something shattering. My heart skipped a beat as I leapt out of bed. I grabbed the nearest object I could use as a weapon and rushed to the other side of the house. The moonlight shone through a shattered window, casting an eerie glow across the room. Below the window was a large rock. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I rushed to the window and peered out into the darkness. In the distance, near the tree line, I saw a figure running away, disappearing into the forest. My mind raced. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, ran to my car, and drove straight into town to contact the police. They arrived quickly, but after investigating the scene and speaking with the owner of the Airbnb, they found nothing. The incident was left unresolved. I managed to find a different place for the weekend, and my friends and I tried to enjoy ourselves, but the strange events at the cabin haunted me. Who was that man? Why had he been watching the cabin? And what was the reason for throwing the rock through the window? I'll never know. The mystery remains unsolved, and to this day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I had gone to bed that night, completely unaware of the man hiding in the shadows just outside the cabin. I had booked an Airbnb several weeks in advance in a town I'd never been to before. A client I was meeting for work lived in the area, so I was only staying there for a day before driving back home. The drive was about 3 hours, and when I finally pulled into the driveway and got out, the neighborhood seemed unnervingly quiet. Most of the houses had their lights off, and the trees covered the lawns, blocking out much of the view. The only thing I really saw was a person walking down the road. They were far down the street, and nothing about them seemed particularly out of place. But for some reason, the sight of them gave me an unsettling feeling, an instinctive unease I couldn't shake. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired from the long drive, and went up to unlock the door. Inside, the house was nothing special, just a very average, nondescript place. But it was perfect for what I needed. After making my rounds and checking the place out, I opened the front door to grab my other bag from the car. As I stepped out onto the porch, though, I noticed something strange. The person I'd seen walking earlier was now standing in the middle of the road, facing the Airbnb. They didn't move at all, just stood there, staring. The air seemed to grow heavier, and I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. I couldn't explain why, but my heart rate picked up. As I started walking toward my car, they noticed me and began to move again, slowly walking away, down the street, as if nothing had happened. I kept my eyes on them, growing increasingly suspicious of whatever it was they were up to. After a few tense moments, I went back inside and made sure all the doors and windows were locked up tight. I felt safer with everything secure, but still uneasy. I opened the garage and pulled my car in, just to be extra cautious. Over the next couple of hours, I kept checking outside, trying to catch another glimpse of the person. But I never saw them again. Eventually, exhaustion set in. I had to get up early the next morning, so I went to bed, though I didn't sleep well. I woke up a few times during the night, but when my alarm went off at 4 a.m., I finally got up. The sun wasn't up yet. It was still pitch black outside. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up in bed, blinking away the sleep, and that's when I saw it. A light creeping from under the bedroom door. I didn't remember leaving any lights on. Maybe I'd forgotten to turn off a kitchen light or something. I told myself it was nothing, but as I stood and approached the door, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint rustling sound, as though something was moving in the hallway. I froze for a moment, then slowly opened the door. The living room light was on. Immediately, I knew I hadn't left it on. My heart started to race as I stepped into the hallway. The sound continued, low and unsettling. I reached the living room and froze in my tracks. There, in the corner, was a man, dressed in a black hoodie and ripped jeans, the same clothes as the person I had seen walking earlier. He was rummaging through one of my bags. I barely had time to process what was happening before he turned around and faced me. His expression was eerie, blank, almost expectant, as though he'd been waiting for me. Before I could react, he dropped the bag and shouted, "Stay where you are." His voice was cold, commanding. My mind raced. I didn't know what he wanted, but I could feel that this wasn't just a simple robbery. Instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I spun around and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut just before he could catch up. He rammed into the door, his body weight slamming against it with an unsettling thud. I could hear him on the other side, trying to force the door open, kicking it and messing with the lock. Panic surged through me. My mind was in overdrive, searching for a way out. I couldn't stay in there. The door wouldn't hold much longer. My eyes darted around the room, and in that moment of desperation, I spotted the window. Without hesitation, I yanked it open and climbed out, landing with a soft thud on the grass below. I didn't stop to look back. I ran, heart pounding in my chest, straight to my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys, desperate to get out of there. By the time I managed to get the police to the house, the man was gone. My bags were missing, of course, but that wasn't what terrified me the most. What made my skin crawl was that the bedroom door was wide open. He had picked the lock and gotten inside. If I had just hidden in there, in the bathroom or under the bed, I don't know what might have happened. I shuddered at the thought. The police told me that his actions seemed more deliberate than a simple robbery. There was something far more sinister about it, something they couldn't quite explain. And as I sit here now, I'm haunted by the thought that he might be watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I pray that he doesn't find me. I stayed at an Airbnb about 3 years ago. There was no special occasion, just a weekend getaway to spend some time off from work. The Airbnb was a cabin, located about 4 hours away from my hometown. The cabin seemed mostly isolated, with only 3 or 4 other cabins scattered within a mile or so. Beyond the cabin, the woods stretched out right up to the backyard. This was exactly what I was looking for, a place to unwind in solitude. I was eager to experience the quiet, surrounded by nature. I arrived early in the morning, and after settling in, I spent the day exploring the property. The cabin had some cool features, and I took my time enjoying every part of it. By the afternoon, I found myself outside, sitting on the back patio in one of those old-fashioned swinging chairs. The sun was warm, and the air was crisp, perfect for taking in the natural beauty. As I gazed out into the distance, something caught my eye. A man was walking through the woods, just on the edge of the tree line. He appeared to be a regular guy, nothing unusual about him at first glance. I assumed he must be staying in one of the other cabins nearby. The man walked deeper into the woods until he was no longer visible, and I returned to my peaceful surroundings. I stayed on the patio for almost an hour, watching the trees sway in the breeze, before deciding to go inside and make dinner. Later that evening, I settled down to watch a movie. The cabin was quiet, with only the soft hum of the TV filling the space. But at some point, as I was absorbed in the film, the doorbell rang. I froze, unsure of what I had just heard. The cabin didn't even seem like it had a doorbell. But there it was again, a sharp, insistent ring. Reluctantly, I stood up and walked to the front door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see the same man from the woods standing on the porch. My mind immediately started racing. "How can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man smiled, a wide, almost unsettling grin, and told me he had been lost for a few hours and needed help finding his way back to his cabin. Something about him felt strange, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Still, I nodded, trying to remain calm. "Yeah, let me grab my phone so you can search the address," I said, closing the door behind me. I went over to the couch and picked up my phone, preparing to assist him. But when I returned to the door, I was shocked to find that the man was no longer there. He wasn't on the porch, nor anywhere in the front yard. I stood there for a moment, confused, before closing the door. Something wasn't right, but it didn't make sense. How could he have vanished so quickly? I stayed cautious, but the evening passed uneventfully, and I eventually went to bed. I slept surprisingly well, considering the odd encounter, and when morning came, I went outside to drink my coffee on the back porch. It was a peaceful, foggy morning, and for a moment, I thought the events of the night before might have been a figment of my imagination. But then, just 10 minutes later, I saw something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. There, once again, was the man walking through the woods in the exact same spot he had been in the day before. He was on the same path, walking as though he had never left. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. He definitely wasn't lost. But then why had he come up to my cabin? I quickly went inside and called one of my friends, needing to talk it through. It made me feel a bit better to have someone else equally confused about the situation. As we talked, however, I heard something that almost made my heart stop. The doorbell. I froze. The sharp chime echoed through the cabin, cutting through the quiet. I quickly whispered into the phone, explaining what was happening. My friend urged me to get out of there immediately. Without thinking twice, I rushed to pack my bags. My hands were shaking as I stuffed clothes and belongings into my suitcase. I checked the peephole to make sure the man wasn't lurking outside, then hurriedly made my way to the car. But just as I was about to drive away, something caught my eye. The man, he was standing in the front window of the cabin, staring at me through the glass. My blood ran cold. I slammed the car door and sped away, not daring to look back. When I got home, I immediately contacted the Airbnb owner to report what had happened. His response was shockingly indifferent. He barely seemed concerned. His message was short. He apologized for my dissatisfaction with the stay, but that was it. It was as if he didn't care that someone had broken into his rental, or worse, had been watching me. I couldn't make sense of it. The whole situation had my head spinning. I still don't know what that man's plan was, but seeing him standing in the window inside the house just moments after I left, well, that is something I'll never forget. It was the most horrifying and creepy thing I've ever experienced. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that whatever he was planning, it wasn't over. I pray I never see him again.